here with Anna Funder, who's the author of two prize-winning books. The first one, Stasiland, which won the Samuel Johnson Award in 2004. And the second, a fiction book, All That I Am, which won the Miles Franklin Award this year. Welcome, Anna. Thank you for coming to talk to me.
Thank you.
Perhaps we could start with All That I Am. Could you give me a little summary as to what the book is actually about?
Well, this is a novel, but it's based on real people and it's based on real events. So, to put it very, very bluntly, they're two couples, kind of quite mismatched couples, but they are anti-Hitler activists before Hitler came to power. And as soon as Hitler came to power, they fled to London in 1933, where they thought they were safe. They continued to smuggle information out of Germany to try and alert the British to what was going on, to Hitler's rearmament of Germany, which was illegal against the Treaty of Versailles. They were feeding information to Seymour Cox and Winston Churchill in Parliament, who were giving speeches about it and so on, but it was a time of high appeasement politics. People really didn't want to be thinking about another war, essentially a generation after the first one. And people also didn't quite realise, and I didn't realise till I started writing this book, that Hitler was sending agents out overseas, basically in the months after he came to power, to track down and kill dissidents. So you think you're escaped and you fled and you're safe, and you weren't. So there are some very well-known killings of a philosopher in Czechoslovakia, and a radio technician there as well. But it came as a great shock to me to realise that the Nazis were operating as early as 1933 in London. And what happens is, just to give the entire plot away, to the extent to which my novel functions as a suspense novel, in March 1935, two of my characters, two women, are found poisoned in the locked bedroom of their flat, top floor flat in Bloomsbury in Great Ormond Street. That really happened. And a week later, the coroner, who would admit no evidence of political activity by these women, political activists and politicians, both of them, returned a verdict of suicide by reason of unsound mind due to romantic disappointment. So all their friends at the time thought that that was an outrageous cover-up, and one of their friends became my friend in Australia much later as an old woman. So I came to this story at one remove. My friend Ruth never told me about this story. But it was through her life that I came to know about it. So I have taken it upon me to rewrite history in a way that makes more sense to me, and I have come up using real bits of evidence that the coroner could have looked at with a novel that says, I think this is how it goes.
So the rewriting of history, as you put it, is because there are lots of gaps that you have to fill in, or because you feel that there's a way, that there's an explanation that needed to be given for events that were obviously shoved under the carpet, given ridiculous whitewash. Is that why you chose to do this as a novel? Is that why you choose to?
Well, there is no. I'm not a forensic analysis person, and I didn't want to write a detective novel, although of course there are the bones of that kind of thing here. I don't have a detective. I didn't want a detective. In a detective novel, or in any television detective series like CSI and CIS, any acronym show you can think of, there's always a dead woman, usually young and preferably naked, being pulled out on a slab in the beginning, and then the entire dramatic interest of the program for the hour is between the forensic investigator or detective and the criminal, and the woman is dead and irrelevant. I wanted my woman to be alive, and I wanted the tension of the book to be that she wants to keep living, as you do. So that's a different kind of book, and that's what I've done. I do think the other thing about fiction is that you can be inside someone's head. So in writing Stasiland, the one thing that I couldn't do was to be inside the heads of my characters, because that's a non-fiction book. When I say characters, they're real people who either resisted the Stasi or worked for the Stasi. And unless someone says to you, this is how I felt when I climbed the wall at 16, this is how it felt to me to be in interrogation for 22 hours. This is how it felt to me to interrogate for 23 hours, a 16-year-old. People did tell me those stories, but unless they told me, I couldn't be inside the head of that person. So I think your question kind of, it's a great fillip to my imagination to be writing a story that I think should exist that doesn't. And whether I do that in non-fiction, like in Stasiland, that had complicated reasons why it's non-fiction, partly because I started writing a novel that was atrocious, but partly because those people in the mid-90s were walking around. My heroes in that book were walking around, running into their former interrogators in the supermarket in Berlin. It's not appropriate to fantasize about that. I needed the book to exist in the world as partly as an aesthetic object, but partly as an act of witnessing in time what was going on then and telling stories that were not being told. So that kind of impetus is behind all that I am as well, but the psychological part of the art of it, so being inside Ruth's head and inside Toller's head, is completely different.
Where does the spur come to do this? I mean, it's a very, I get the sense it's a very strong and specific part of you is being a witness, analysing, but looking at these very dramatic moments and incidents in history. And I mean, I've both, extraordinarily being able to pull out these stories in Stasiland. What do you think has formed you that results in you taking on these really amazing projects?
I never think I'm taking on an amazing project. I think, something really fascinates me. It's like I'm gripped by something and then I follow it through. But it's not the drama of, no, that's not quite true. I mean, obviously these stories are very dramatic, but it's the human drama that I'm interested in. So it's an exploration of what it is to be human. I could write, perhaps if I were more talented, I could write the same kind of dramatic stories as the ones that I like to read, which are much more domestic. So I could write, maybe one day in the future, the kind of Frank Bascombe story or the Alice Munro story and all the Laurie Moore stories or A.M. Holmes stories, or all these things that I like. But I am very attracted to what it means to be brave and what it is to have a conscience. And those things in the human animal tend to come out at moments of extreme politics. So for me, the setup of the Stasi and the people that they observed, or of my people resisting the Nazi regime, is the kind of dramatic given, and within that framework I can explore courage and betrayal and love and desire and patriotism, what it is to belong. So I don't actually set out to do anything big. I set out to look quite micro at the human animal, and it just happens to be that they're in these settings because I know them.
Yeah. When you started on Stasiland, how did you come to get the interviews that you got, the information that you were able to procure?
Well, really, I talk about that process in the book, so I kind of describe it. But I more or less stumbled across the stories of the resistors. So after the wall fell, the citizens' rights activists opened little very handmade museums inside the former Stasi offices. So the large bureaucratic buildings from which they had been surveyed, literally, or imprisoned in cells, became all of a sudden places where a bearded citizens' rights activist we would be putting up on a pinboard extraordinary bits of somebody's file, or of instructions for hand gestures from one Stasi agent to another when following someone, and so on. So I went to one of those places. I got chatting with the woman who was there, and she said, "Oh, sounds like you really need to go and talk to this woman, Miriam Weber, she's called in the book, and I think she might have a story for you." And I went, and that was just the beginning of the end. I really loved this woman. She had the most extraordinary story. She hadn't told it before. And that story became the bookend for Stasiland. And eventually, my landlady had a story. My landlady, she was a woman my age. I was subletting this total dive I lived in that she had lived in before. She had an extraordinary story. I knew the rock star Klaus Renft. I came across Frau Paul through another one of these museums. And those people became my friends, and Frau Paul and Klaus Renft are now dead, sadly. But they were easy to find, and as it turns out, no one knew at the time, but tens of thousands of people resisted this regime. It's not as easy as you might think to get somebody to betray, to inform on their brothers and cousins and children and colleagues. That's quite extraordinary. For the Stasi men, I had to advertise. So I met this woman who said, "I'll never talk to you. They've completely disappeared. They've gone to ground." And they had really disappeared out of fear of lynching and lawsuits, none of which happened. And she said to me, "You'll never find them." This woman who was making an academic study of them, and she couldn't find any. So I advertised in the local columns of the Potsdam newspaper. I took out an ad. I had someone check it, but nevertheless, the ad ended up reading, "Australian writer seeks Stasi men. View conversation." I think something like publication in English or something. I mean, I had no idea that the book was going to go into so many languages, including German. Anyway, there were repercussions of that. So I went and talked to all these Stasi men, had all these assignations with them, which I then described in the book. Later on, they sued my publisher successfully to have some of the things about them
removed in Germany. Yeah.
Page 84.
So that was, I mean, were there other things that you were unable to put in that you really felt needed to go in, or
Not really. I put everything in that I wanted to put in. There was one thing I thought, which was true, but I thought was actually just almost too unbelievable to be true. I thought I might lose credibility with my reader, and I regret that I didn't put it in. When I went to visit Normannenstrasse, where Herr Meikle, who was the head of the Stasi, so he's Big Brother incarnate, a noxious little man who liked to shoot animals and torment people, had his office, and you can go into his office and you can see the death mask of Lenin on the desk, and you can go into his private pissoir, and you can see all these things. And I went there, and it was closing time. I went with the cleaning woman. I do describe this visit in Stasiland. So you can go into his private pissoir and see what he was up to. I went with the closing woman, with the cleaning woman at closing time, and she told me some stories about the place, including, which I knew, that Orwell was contraband in the GDR. You couldn't have a copy of 1984. I'd read all of Orwell, but I didn't read 1984 deliberately before I'd written Stasiland. She said to me, of course he had a copy of Orwell, so Big Brother has his own Orwell in his own locked box. And she said, we don't know whether it was because he liked it so much or whether it was because he was taking that book as a model. But normally, because his office is on the second floor, its office number would start with 2. 201, 202, 203. But he so desperately wanted his office to have the same number as Big Brother's office in 1984, room 101, that he had the ground floor renamed the mezzanine, and his office number is room 101. And I thought, even for me, with my lurid and over-the-top imagination, I can't put that in. And sometimes I think, yeah, maybe I should have gone in.
How about future projects? What are you looking at?
I'm working on 2 things, and I'm actually working on 3 things. One is a short essay on courage. It's called Mother Courage, and that will be out as a small hardback next year. And I'm working on 2 novels side by side, and I'm going to see which one takes off. So one is a kind of known quantity to me. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time, and the other is more exploratory. And one is quite emotionally difficult, and the other less so. And I'm just going to see, when I recover from this year, I'm going to see which one takes me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for talking to me, Anna.